Hello, I'm Edward Tarte, once a Catholic priest for 5 years in the 1960s, now an atheist, which means I find no credible evidence for the existence of any God. Today is Sunday, May 5th, 2013. In my nation, the United States, last Thursday was the government-sponsored National Day of Prayer. The following day, Friday, on National Public Radio, there was a 10-minute segment relevant to that. It was from the program Tell Me More. The host, Michelle Martin, interviewed the humanist chaplain at Harvard University, Greg Epstein. I invite you to listen with me now to most of that segment.
This is Tell Me More from NPR News. I'm Michelle Martin. It's time for Faith Matters. That's the part of our program where we talk about matters of faith and spirituality. And today is a good day for this conversation because the National Day of Prayer was observed yesterday. It was created in 1952 by Congress and signed into law by President Truman. And the day is meant to convey the importance of prayer and to encourage prayer. And all this probably comes at a welcome time for many Americans as we continue to recover from recent tragedies like the Boston Marathon bombing and that fertilizer plant fire in Texas. But that got us to thinking, what about people who do not pray? According to the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, those who say they do not belong to any religion or worship any deity are the fastest growing faith group, if we can call it that, in this country. We wanted to talk more about this, so we've called upon Greg Epstein. He is the humanist chaplain at Harvard University, and he's the author of the book, Good Without God, A Billion Non-Religious People Do Believe. Welcome to the program. Welcome back, I should say. You've been with us before. Thanks for joining us once again.
Thanks very much for having me, Michelle.
So, Greg Epstein, just starting with the National Day of Prayer, which was observed yesterday, I'm sure that there were events around the country or people, clergy people referred to it or had certain kinds of events. What do you do on a day like that?
Well, first of all, I don't have any problem with the idea that people are getting together to pray and even to pray in large groups or large communities around the country. I think that for people who are of sincere religious faith can be a wonderful activity, and it doesn't affect me in any negative way. I do have concerns when it is associated with violations of the separation of church and state. But beyond that, we in the humanist, secular, atheist, non-religious community have made this also into what we've called a day of reason for ourselves. But for me, I think that what's really important to keep in mind on a day like this or around these kinds of celebrations is just that we're talking about American values. So prayer and religion is one American value. It's not the only one. We're also talking about the values of being reasonable, using our human intelligence to solve problems, being compassionate, caring about other people, working to connect with people and include people and value people in all sorts of ways. And that's what I'm reflecting on when every year when the Day of Prayer and the Day of Reason comes around.
What about in times of personal or national crisis? And, I mentioned two of the more traumatic ones that have occurred recently. It's become common to have some kind of a prayer service, an interfaith service, in order to acknowledge the pain and the grief that people feel. And often, people themselves, when they don't have any other tangible way to respond to a tragedy, they'll say, well, I'll pray for you. Well, what do you do in times like this?
Well, when people are saying, I'll pray for you, I might say, I'm thinking of you. But more importantly than that, when these kinds of crises affect humanist communities like the ones that I work with, and the Boston Marathon very much directly affected my own community, we act like any other community or congregation in many ways, in the sense that as soon as the marathon bombings took place, we were on the phone with one another, calling all night, all the next day, really to the point of exhaustion. Everybody trying to figure out, is everybody else in the community okay? Who was hurt? Who was affected? Who needs anything? Who's feeling traumatized? How can we reach out to others beyond our community? How can we help? Because at a moment of crisis, what people are really traumatized by is that we feel so helpless. And for humanists, the number one way to overcome feeling helpless is to reach out and help other people. it's part of what human beings need to do is we need to connect with one another, and we need to work on behalf of something bigger than just ourselves or even our individual families.
If you're just joining us, I'm speaking with Greg Epstein. He is the humanist chaplain at Harvard. We're talking about how humanists, atheists, agnostics handle a spiritual crisis. Obviously, we're talking about this in the wake of the recent tragedies that have called upon faith communities to respond. One other thing I wanted to ask you about that, on a related note, there was an interfaith service in Boston held
Sure.
after the bombing. There was also one in Texas, I need to say, after that fertilizer plant exploded. But I noted that people from the humanist community explicitly wanted to have a specific role in that service, and that did not happen. And I understand that there were people, including yourself, who were upset about that. But I also understand that there are a lot of people who are puzzled by that. They would wonder why you felt that you should have been there, given that you explicitly don't believe in what these people believe in, which is faith.
So, these are all really important questions, obviously. And the thing that I think we need to keep in mind is what is really at the center of our response to these tragedies? Is it our religious beliefs, which differ tremendously between groups, among all these different groups and among individuals? Or is it our human need to turn to one another and to seek inspiration and comfort alongside one another? And, I would argue that it's the latter. And therefore, I think when we have these memorials, and I've been working with humanist communities since before 9/11, because our community grieves and bleeds just like anyone else's, and I want to work alongside all other communities to be of help and service at those moments. Really, what we were hoping for was just some form of inclusion whatsoever. And I think that's, more importantly, that's what we're looking for going forward in future memorials, in future conventions, in future inaugural settings. I have nothing against the values of religious Americans, but as President Obama did in his famous first inaugural address, the famous moment where he said, and non-believers, right, and the non-religious. These are very quick and easy things that politicians can say to indicate that they understand that inclusion is for everyone. And that would have been enough.
But I want to ask you about that, though, because the inauguration is explicitly an event of state. It is one that recognizes the body politic as a matter of state. An interfaith service is a voluntary event, and he may go as a citizen and as a representative of the people in solidarity with other people, but he is a believer. So
Sure.
I think this is the part where I think many people are confused. I think they'd be confused by you would not feel as a Christian that you would need to be invited to a bar mitzvah, right? Or some other Jewish tradition. So why would you feel as a believer? You could be. It would be nice if somebody was your friend.
Yeah, if one of my best friends who was of a different religion than I was having a big family function, and we had been really close for years, it wouldn't matter to me that we had different beliefs. I'd still want to attend. Think about it this way. These huge national events are huge national family functions. And I just look forward to a time in which it's normal in this country to say that all good people in this country, and there are good people of religious and non-religious backgrounds, are included in what we're doing here. And we can mention that briefly, and we can celebrate together.
What would you have said had you been invited to participate?
Well, I helped organize the Interfaith Vigil at Harvard after the Boston Marathon bombings. And I said, look, on a day like today, on a moment like this, many of us feel that we are torn between two worlds. That on the one hand, when I'm trying to deal with a crisis, I reach out for my own community, for that which makes me feel like I'm in the company of people who see this the way I do, who treat it the way I do, who are like me. And I reach out with one hand towards those people. But on the other hand, I really want to reach out with the other hand to all of my community, to all of America, to all of my city, to all of the world. And I feel like in those moments, we can hold on with both hands and we can make our society better together, truly together. And it was really a nice moment when I said that part about the holding on with both hands. I had Nuri, the Muslim chaplain, and Jonah, the Jewish chaplain, on both sides of me, and I put my arms around them, and we stood there with our candles and in the darkness and in silence, and it felt like real unity to me. And it didn't matter about religious or non-religious. It was all about human values and human community.
You know, faith groups often have a way of greeting or saying goodbye to each other that can be very comforting in a time of crisis. Do you have something like that?
I like to part with people with a hug. When I'm with somebody that I care about, whether it's a member of my community or not, I like to give them a hug and just show them physically, I care about you.
Well, you're too far away for that, so thank you for that. But I can't manage that right now.
You're talking about
us?
I'm
talking about us. But so in future, I hope we'll speak again. I hope it'll be under happier circumstances.
Me too.
With that, I'll say take care.
All right.
All right. Greg Epstein is the humanist chaplain at Harvard University. He was kind enough to join us from the studios there in Cambridge. Greg, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's a pleasure.
My responses to the Boston Marathon bombing and to the Texas fertilizer plant explosion were to make contributions of money to a group called Atheists Giving Aid. They sent money to help the victims with no proselytizing whatsoever, just a check from Atheists Giving Aid. In my nation, millions of religious believers are convinced that we atheists are thoroughly evil. Well, Greg Epstein is not evil, nor am I. We are good without any God. There is nothing about being an atheist that rules out being a good, moral, loving, caring person. I hope that some religious believers will see this video. I hope that some of you, my fellow atheists who watch this, will be able to share it with a religious believer. To all of you, thank you for watching.